Hi, I'm Jamie Poisson. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has existed in the public consciousness really since the 1970s.
Would you like to be the president of the United States?
I really don't believe I would run it, but I would like to see somebody as the president who could do the job, and there are very capable people in this country.
It's a story many will be familiar with. New York City heir to his father's real estate business turned real estate magnate of his own, turned reality TV star, turned president of the United States. Different parts of that story have been told many times over, on television, and podcasts, and documentaries. Trump has been the butt of the joke on shows like SNL for some 4 decades now.
What makes you think you can defeat Joe Biden this time?
Well, I think I'm doing even better this time in terms of Hispanic. I like to say I put the panic in Hispanic, and people are sick of having an alleged criminal like Joe Biden in the White House. They want a convicted criminal, someone they can trust to get the crimes done right.
But there's a new film that's been the subject of great controversy, which stands to tell the Trump story in a way that we haven't seen before. The Apprentice follows a young, awkward, ambitious Donald and his bid for respect among New York City elite. And really, it centers around his relationship with notorious New York City lawyer and political fixer, Roy Cohn, and the shortcuts, cheats, and bully tactics that Trump would eventually learn to wield on his journey to power. The film opened to rave reviews, an 8-minute-long standing ovation at the Cannes Film Festival, to be exact. But in the time since, Team Trump has unleashed a pressure campaign to keep the film from the public. And just like that, a film that seemed prime for Oscar season was suddenly struggling to find its way to theaters. So today we're joined by Dan Beckerman, a producer of The Apprentice, for a discussion about the film's complicated journey to theaters, Team Trump's bid to cancel the film, and the difficulty of making a movie about a man everybody already feels that they have figured out. Dan, thank you so much for coming on to Front Burner.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. So before we get into the narrative of the film, Donald Trump is one of the defining figures of the 21st century, one of the most famous men in the world. And his story is one that's been told a bunch of times already, right? In books, documentaries, television shows, podcasts, more. What made you all decide to tell his story, and why now?
Well, you said it very well, which is that everyone feels they know Donald Trump. They know the persona. But that's the thing. They really know the persona that he is projecting out into the world. And what I think this movie accomplishes is it really shows how he learned how to create that persona. And he learned it from this lawyer named Roy Cohn, who was a very notorious lawyer, but he was extremely skilled at building a narrative that would kind of win in legal cases. And he really imparted this knowledge to Donald, and he created, he showed Donald how to create that persona that now we're all so familiar with. But what we don't know as well is, kind of who's behind the curtain. I've started using the metaphor of the Wizard of Oz near the end when Dorothy and Tin Man and Scarecrow and Cowardly Lion arrive at the castle, and they're confronted by this giant green face.
The great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
You are? I don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard.
But then Toto pulls back the curtain, and you see there's a very human kind of a vulnerable man behind that curtain who's projecting this image of omnipotence of that green face. But who is that man behind the curtain? We're much less familiar with that. And that's how I'm seeing the movie is just showing how that all started, showing how Donald, the person, learned to project this sort of all-powerful image that he wants us to see.
You know, we meet Donald in this film when he's in his mid-20s, right? He's kind of this awkward playboy, desperate to gain the respect of his father and New York City's elite. And it's at this point when he and his father are subject to a discrimination lawsuit from the State Department for allegedly refusing to rent to Black families. And, you know, it's at this juncture that he meets Roy Cohn. And just tell me a little bit about, you know, how Cohn enters his life and, you know, what happens in those early days.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the movie, where you're just seeing this young, ambitious guy. And it's surprising to many people who watch the movie how much you get emotionally engaged with this young guy who just wants to get out from under his father's shadow.
Donald, the Chrysler building is in foreclosure.
Well, the
And
Chrysler
you
building...
want to open a hotel around the corner.
The Chrysler building is a
It's
landmark,
like
so it's
adding
absolutely
a
fine.
deck chair to the Titanic.
Dad, sooner or later you might have to accept the fact that it could be right. And maybe I know what I'm doing.
Look, Donald, I respect what you've done.
I really hope so. I hope so. I hope so, Dad. I really do.
You know, his father pretty clearly made him feel like he was never good enough, and sort of makes all the children in the family feel that way. And Donald wants to prove himself, and he's trying to prove himself in the world of Manhattan in the 70s and 80s, where, you know, it's not like it is today. It was pretty gritty. It was a pretty tough world, that Manhattan. And but he wants to show he can mix with the you know, the millionaires. And, you know, there's a scene at early in the movie at Le Club where he's bragging to a young model he's on a date with that he's the youngest member ever to be accepted to that club.
There's a skill to being a billionaire. It's a talent. You have to be born with it. You have to have a certain gene, you know.
It's a pretty cool place.
Yeah, and they say I'm the youngest member ever admitted.
That must be a big thing.
It is. It's a very big thing.
And that's where he meets Roy. And Roy's, you know, having drinks with, you know, pretty shady characters, many of whom he represents, including mob bosses and things like that. And Roy sees Donald, and, you know, Roy was an, you know, pretty remarkable ball of contradictions himself, because he was a gay man, but would frequently use information he had from the gay community against people in court cases. But he saw young Donald, and he invited him to his table.
What's your name, handsome?
I'm Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, nice to meet you. Roy Cohn.
The Roy Cohn from all the papers and everything?
That's right, the Roy Cohn from all the papers, that's right.
Yeah, you're brutal.
I'm brutal,
Yeah.
That's right.
And from that moment, he took him under his wing, and it started this relationship that, you know, that both men had different objectives. You know, Donald wanted to be accepted in this elite world of Manhattan, elite, although probably quite shady. And Roy, you know, there was possibly an element of romance in Roy's mind, because, you know, a lot of Roy's boyfriends were tall and blonde, and but he really saw in Donald, you know, a vessel that he could impart his worldview onto, and his worldview was really shaped by these rules. Roy called them his rules for winning.
You want to know how to win? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There's rules. Roy Cohn's 3 rules of winning.
The first rule is the simplest. Attack, attack, attack.
Rule 2. Admit nothing. Deny everything.
Rule 3. This is the most important rule of all. Okay? No matter what happens,
You have to drive
no
this
matter
fast?
what they say about you, no matter how beaten you are, you claim victory and never admit defeat. Never admit defeat. You want to win, that's how you win.
Never, ever, no matter what, never admit defeat. And that might seem kind of familiar. And also, I see that third rule as being about showing any weakness, showing any vulnerability is, I think, the subtext of that rule. And we can see all those rules, really, they're quite simple. And we can see how they have been adopted and integrated into really kind of everything Donald does.
Is the idea here essentially that Trump's shtick, the bluster, the lying, the bullying, the vying for power, the charisma, is essentially an imitation of Roy Cohn?
Yeah, well, this is definitely a master-student story with Roy and Donald, but I think it may also be a case of where the student surpasses the master, because Donald definitely did adopt Roy's worldview and, kind of climbed into it like a second skin that he's been wearing ever since. And yet Roy used those rules for winning cases when he was representing shady people. He also is someone who was responsible for having the Rosenbergs executed, even when he was a very young man, working with McCarthy.
The electric chair awaited the two convicted spies as the hour of their final reckoning approached, and then it was over. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg had paid their debt to society with their lives. For the first time in its 177-year history, a United States civil court had decreed and followed through on the execution of two native-born Americans on the charge of espionage.
But Donald applied that worldview and those rules in a very different way than Roy had done. So I don't think it's as simple as Donald is just copying Roy. I think he understood the power of those sort of techniques or that worldview. But he, instead of just applying them to legal cases like Roy did, he applied them to himself. And he really used them to create this image, like we were saying in the beginning, this image of someone who cannot lose. Donald J. Trump, the man with the golden toilet who cannot lose. And by creating that persona, he actually gave himself an advantage in the business world and then later in the political world, where that's just a compelling character, especially in America, where people, the idea of the American dream is so fundamental. In the business world, for instance, his reputation in negotiations with other business people, he would get things through. He would get an advantage in deal making. He was able to, really shortchange, people working for him, not pay bills, using the currency of that character that he had created. And he recognized how powerful that was, and then he applied it to politics.
I should say, this film is obviously fictionalized to some extent, but also, of course, based on a lot of real things. And just for people listening, how much of this film is fictionalized?
Well, the film was written by Gabriel Sherman, who is an investigative journalist, very accomplished, writes for Vanity Fair and The New Yorker. And, he also wrote The Loudest Voice in the Room, that became a series about Fox News and had real world impact on Fox News. A lot of the, heavily verified and well-sourced writing he did in that case. And he did that in this case as well, Gabe. Every aspect of the movie is based on meticulous research. That said, you're right, it is a fictionalized account. It's a story, it's a movie. But where it matters, where there's, perhaps some controversy, I think you'll find in every case that it's based on, very thorough research.
Well, here's one of those moments, which I can imagine will ring alarm bells in Trump world. It is the depiction of Donald Trump's alleged 1989 rape of his wife, Ivana Trump, an account which was based on her own testimony under oath in 1990. I'm sure this is something you all knew would inspire some controversy. And so what is the thinking that goes into a scene which portrays a former U.S. president as a rapist?
Yeah, and, I cared a lot about that. I'm not interested in being, accusing real people of things that are baseless or being sensational. And, as the producer on this project, who is kind of frankly the most responsible in the sense that the company is owned by me that produced the film, is owned by me, and I have to take that responsibility extremely seriously. And so I did a very deep dive into that subject matter and spoke with Gabe about it and looked at the sources for the information and spoke to many lawyers about it. And I was compelled to believe that the scene that we have in this movie is really quite fair, based on the information that's out there. First of all, it's based on under oath court deposition that Ivana gave herself about this incident during their divorce proceedings. And in the under oath statement, she describes a scene that it's not exactly as it appears in the movie, but I would say what she described is actually worse than what's in the movie. And then she did, to be thorough and fair, she did later in a book that was written about her, and sort of there was a disclaimer that was put on that book. And in that book, it also describes a scene that's quite close to what we have in the movie. But in that book, there was a disclaimer that she gave in which she did not deny that it happened. She sort of tries to clarify that she didn't mean to imply that, I think her fairly close to her exact words were, while I felt violated as a woman and these events did happen, I didn't mean to imply that it constituted rape in the criminal sense. So
right. I think I just got right in a literal or criminal
in a literal
sense.
or criminal sense. Thank you for that exact quote. But that's pretty close to what she said. And later when he was running for president, it's true, she further distanced herself from it and said that he's the father of my children, he'll make a great president. She did say that as well before she died. But it was important to me. I know it was important to Maria Bakalova, who played Ivana in the movie, to do justice to Ivana as a person. And I think a lot of the tragedy that is in this movie is in that relationship between Donald and Ivana. And, to me, what I see in it is a kind of loss of humanity in that scene that I do think is tragic. People who've seen the movie, there's all kinds of reactions, but many people feel surprised at how much empathy the film builds for this person, especially early in the movie when you see him kind of struggling to prove himself. But obviously neither do we shy away. We don't sugarcoat it, some of the things either. And overall, I think it adds up to, like I said, I think something that's sort of a tragic loss of humanity that occurs in this story as the young Donald Trump kind of transforms into the guy we're very familiar with right now.
As we've talked about, the film is about the making of Trump, the character, how he learned to leverage power and people to get his way. And in some ways now, art is kind of imitating life a little bit. When the movie premiered at Cannes, the film, as I said, received this long-standing ovation. It appeared to be on this trajectory for a wide release and even critical acclaim and success. But then Team Trump became involved. The famously litigious Trump issued a cease and desist letter, and the billionaire Dan Snyder that put up equity for the film reportedly sought to block its release. ABC and CBS also refused to air commercials for the film during the presidential debate. And you have since had real issues getting the film to theaters. And just, can you walk me through the series of events from Cannes to today?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to start with the end, which is that we've made it through all those challenges. This is a good news story. We have made it through. The movie is coming out Friday, and we have, a pretty exciting release happening. There's all kinds of reviews coming out, and they're pretty darn positive, I have to say. And the movie is coming out. But yeah, cut back to the Cannes Festival. We had this incredible screening, pretty elated feelings all around. And then I think it was like an hour after the screening, one of the actors showed me on his phone, there's a tweet, and the tweet threat from the Trump campaign. And then a couple of days later, there were cease and desist letters with all kinds of, frankly, pretty ridiculous accusations from Trump and his lawyers, threatening, us, but also any distributor who would dare to bring the movie to audiences. And so what that did is, honestly, that was a chilling experience, because I saw how it did affect the big corporate distribution companies that typically bring movies out. When they're going to go to a wider audience, you're typically working with a big company that's either a subsidiary of an even bigger company or just in its own right, a giant kind of entertainment company. And those companies were intimidated by those threats from Trump. And there was a real chilling effect in the industry where, we privately had conversations with people from many of those companies saying they loved the film and wished they could take it on, distribute it, but that they couldn't take the risk on after those threats. They couldn't take the risk of, being sued by Trump. They couldn't take the risk of alienating what they would see as half the country, even though the film, like we were talking about, is not really a political attack piece at all. That's not what it is. Nonetheless, those fears ruled their decision-making process. And I think I was really witnessing, it's almost like Christmas Carol, where you're seeing, the possibilities of the future. And, what I think I was seeing is, okay, yes, there's a direction the United States could go, or any country could go, where if a person is powerful enough and they have low enough regard for the laws and conventions that surround things like free speech, they can suppress speech. They can suppress stories without even, changing any laws. They can simply use fear to suppress stories that they don't like, as long as they're willing to do it, and the companies that would normally, distribute art and movies are willing to be intimidated. It can happen very quickly, and I think that is essentially what was happening. And for me, I like Ali Abbasi, our director, is Iranian Danish, and his previous movie to The Apprentice, Holy Spider, there was an extreme reaction from the Iranian government to his film, which was very consequential for him personally. It was certainly banned in that country, but it went further than that in terms of consequences. And to think that his experience with the Iranian government, suppressing his speech, in his next movie in the United States is happening again with just a different powerful person, it says a lot.
You said you're on track for release Friday. What changed? What changed?
We had one distributor, Briarcliff Entertainment, run by a guy named Tom Ortenberg, who has a history of frankly being brave in the face of these kinds of challenges. He was the distributor of the movie Spotlight that the Catholic Church was very unhappy with, among many others. And frankly, he, sorry to be crass, but he was the only distributor with enough balls to take on our movie. And so we have, been working in it with very little money and very little time. But we have a plan to release the movie, and everyone can go see it this weekend. And I do think people seeing this movie is a statement as well. It's a statement that, powerful people shouldn't be able to silence voices that just are inconvenient or unflattering to them in their minds. That should not be something that's easy for them to do.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is, Dan Snyder's role in all of this. I don't know how much you can say, but so this is the former owner of the Washington Commanders NFL football team. He is a friend of the former president. Originally, he believed, it's been reported, that this would be a flattering portrayal of Donald Trump when he agreed to help fund the film. And, he was allegedly approached by his son-in-law who runs a production company. And he walked out of the screening when he finally watched the movie. And just how exactly is it that this mega billionaire became one of the main funders of a film that Trump is now so strongly against?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've learned over the course of my career that it's extremely difficult to finance any movie. So, is there always a rhyme and reason? It's not always easy to see of how a movie gets financed, but you basically you have to do what you have to do. And the fact is, this movie would not have been made without Kinematics investing into it. And they've put out statements about why they felt they needed to part ways with the project, and I'll just let them speak for themselves on that. But ultimately, am grateful for anyone who helps get the movies made that I feel passionately about. There's usually only one very narrow path up the mountain to get a movie made, and this was ours.
And final question for you. Are there any things that you learned about Donald Trump in the making of this movie that surprised you, right? Or I think you're going to say yes to this. So what are the things that you learned about him that surprised you, or any ways that your opinion or sense of him had changed at all over the course of this production?
Yeah, I think it just got me to understand more deeply, how a person, because, everybody in the world, we're all people, even the ones that, a lot of people don't like, we are all people. And how does a person get from A to B? What happened that led to this character that we're all so familiar with, having this role in our society? And I think that's where the movie really has something of value for audiences, which is we all understand ambition. We all can understand in some way feeling that you need to prove something to maybe to your family or to yourself. And to watch this character being built by him, by Donald. He built this character. He learned these techniques from Roy, and he used them to create this persona of the character he called Donald J. Trump. I see that as being him as a storyteller ahead of his time, because that where my mind went on that is that we're in this era where everyone has discovered the power of creating a public persona for yourself, where you curate meticulously how you're perceived in this public way often through social media. We've all entered that era where that's kind of, the main ingredient we use in many of us in our careers socially. It's to create this projected image of ourselves that gives us real world power. Donald learned to do that from Roy in the late 70s and early 80s. So to me, it's actually completely intuitive that skill of his would resonate in our era.
Dan, this is super interesting. Thank you so much for coming by, and wishing you the best of luck with your release.
Thank you so much.
All right, that is all for this week. Front Burner was produced this week by Joytha Sen Gupta, Matt Muse, Matt Amha, Aja Sauter, Eamon Barre, and Ali James. Sound design was by Mackenzie Cameron and Marco Luciano. Music is by Joseph Shabison. Our senior producer is Elaine Chow. Our executive producer is Nick McCabe-Locos, and I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.